Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Door to Door. I'm Virginia Stanley, joined here by my colleagues, Chris Connolly and Lainey Mays. Hello, Chris. Hello, Lainey.
Greetings, all.
Hello.
We are thrilled to have two exceptional authors with us today to talk about their incredible books. We have read them, we have loved them, and we're probably sure a lot of you have read them already too. But now you're going to hear about them from our authors. We have New York Times best-selling author Jacqueline Winspear, whose new book, Consequences of Fear, will be out in March.
Oh,
sorry,
March.
I do that every time.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be here.
We're so happy to have you here.
Thanks.
I love all the book backgrounds. And then we have Sophia Bennett, author of the WINDSOR KNOT, this wonderful adult novel. Sophia has a long list of young adult children's books that she has. This is her first adult book, and this is about Queen Elizabeth as a detective. Sophia, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here, and particularly thrilled to be here alongside Jacqueline today. It's perfect.
It's been great meeting you, Sophia. Really, really lovely. All those points of connection. Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah, we were talking about that a little while ago, and just before we went live, to say, that listening to authors meet each other, watching them, just to connect, and it's really sort of fly on the wall kind of fun for us to listen to you and to watch you just and communicate with each other, and as you say, connect on so many different levels. So, as you know, Jackie and Sophia, we have librarians are watching, and they will be watching and watching as this episode is shared on Facebook. So what we're going to do is speak first with Jacqueline Winspear, and we'll put Sophia on the virtual green room, which basically means she'll stay right where she is with her God Save the Queen pillow, and wait for us to bring her back on our camera. But if there's anything that you want to say to each other, to us, to librarians before we get going, now would be the time.
Well, my comment to librarians is that I just love librarians and libraries. And I often talked about my experience as a kid going to the very, very tiny library in our small town, and my mum used to pick out the library books for the entire street. They're mainly elderly people, which meant my little brother used to be increasingly squashed up at this end of the baby carriage, as I walked along clutching my books. And no wonder he screamed a lot when he was a kid. He was covered in books. But I've been very privileged to visit a lot of libraries on both sides of the Atlantic. And where would I ever have been as a kid without a library? Because we couldn't afford books. That was way beyond my parents' budget, and yet we had books because of libraries, and they mean so much to us all, especially at this time. Thank you, librarians.
I can only second that. Yeah, I mean, we had I was in Hong Kong for a couple of years, which I might talk about later, and we had a little thing like an ice cream van that used to come around, which was the library, and getting books out of that when I was kind of 7 or 8 was what kept me going when I was living far away from home. So yes, thank you, librarians. You just going.
Well, we're thrilled to have both of you here, and Jackie, you've been to the American Library Association several times, and yes. Always been such a great supporter. And Sophia, we're so thrilled to have you here with this list. I have to say, when your editor presented your book, The WINDSOR KNOT, at launch, boy, the room sort of lit up. I mean, the enthusiasm for the book is really something. So anyway, welcome to our publishing house. We're glad you're under our roof.
Happy to be here.
So
I was going to say, I love the title, by the way, of your book. And I don't want to take up too much time with this, but my dad, my late father, was a very, very dapper man. And always, if no one knows what the WINDSOR KNOT, I'm sure you'll tell them, but he always insisted upon a WINDSOR KNOT. And after he passed away, I can remember saying to the funeral director, "Do you know how to do a WINDSOR KNOT here?" And he looked at me and said, "Jacqueline, I was in the Guards." And I thought, well, okay, yep, you got it. I won't belabor that point, but really brought back some memories, that title.
That's so sweet. Well, we'll find out more about that in a little bit. So right now we're going to ask Sophia to just sit tight, and we'll be back in a little bit to learn more about the WINDSOR KNOT, and we'll focus right now on Ms. Jacqueline Winspear's book.
Thank you very much indeed. I thought what I'd start with is perhaps going back a bit, and I'm assuming a little bit of knowledge among librarians for the series here. But, you know, when I first wrote Maisie Dobbs, which was so long ago and yet seems like yesterday in so many ways, I hadn't intended to write a series. I had a book in my head or a story in my head that I wanted to write. And it was just after the book went into production and so on, my then editor called me and said, right, Jacqueline, let's talk about the next book in the series. And I thought, gulp, next book in the series. And I tap danced, you know, to say, well, you know, I someone at the door, I've got to rush now, but I'll call you tomorrow. I thought, what am I going to do? But while I was writing, there were pieces, you know, sections that I had pulled out because I thought they just don't fit. And I put them in a file marked fragments. I always keep a file marked fragments. The Winspears are pack rats. That's what we do. We keep stuff. And as soon as she said that, I literally printed off all these different paragraphs and I put them all over the floor. And I started putting them together, and I realized I had the bare bones of about another 6. And when I say bare bones, I'm talking, you know, real bare bones of about another 6 stories. So I sat back and I thought, what do I want to create if I'm writing a series? And I realized that what I wanted to do was to not only create, obviously, the arc of each story, which I would have to think about, but I wanted to create an arc of the whole story of not just Maisie Dobbs, this character that had come to me and that I'd created, but the other characters in the books. And I wanted to see them grow and change. And I wanted to see how they were impacted by the events of that particular period in time, which was a tumultuous time, not just the Great War, but between the wars and then moving on to after the Second World War. And I thought, I didn't know if I could do it, but I wanted to create that arc. So in a way, it's not just a series of mysteries. And of course, there's a mystery that is the linchpin in each story, but there was almost like a family saga. I would create a body of work. It was very ambitious. So that's what I've tried to do. And as you know, if you've read through the series, that there have been touch points along the way as I've followed history, if you will. And, you know, I know personally so many people of a certain age or grew up around them who had lived through these times. So that memory was a great resource for me. And so here we are. We come to the consequences of fear. And we're in October 1941. Sorry, something just happened. Oh, I just noticed what happened to my screen. The screens still throw me sometimes. We're in October 1941. And a young boy, a messenger, he's running messengers between different, let's say, offices of the Secret Service. And he's taking these messages. He's a very fast runner. And during one of these message runs, he sees something that he really wishes he hadn't seen. And what it amounts to is murder. He later believes that he has seen the person who perpetrated the crime. He goes to the police. No one believes him. He's a kid at night. It's a bomb, what they called a bomber's moon. And people know that, you know, kids have a big imagination. And he's very frustrated because no one believes him. But he remembers that he once ran a message to a woman who worked in Fitzroy Square. And he remembered seeing the plaque on the outside of her building. And he knew that she perhaps might believe him. And so he goes to Maisie Dobbs. I'm not going to say much more than that, except that Maisie Dobbs, she's also doing, quote unquote, her national service. And everybody in the war was asked to do their national service. Some women drove ambulances. You'll remember that Maisie has done that before. And her stepmother has joined the Women's Voluntary Service. It was only much later that it became the Royal Women's Voluntary Service. And people did all sorts of jobs. So that people were doing their national service. Maisie's national service has taken her into the realms of the Special Operations Executive. And it is in that realm that she becomes entangled, not only in this particular loss of life, but other losses of life. So before I trip over and tell you way more than you should know at the moment, I'll tell you one of the little sort of pieces of inspiration for this particular book. It's interesting that my father's history, I always thought that if I wrote books, perhaps my mum's history during the war would form more of an inspiration. Certainly her experience being evacuated in World War II inspired the character of Anna, who has actually decidedly a better time than my mother had. But it's interesting that some of the jobs that my father did were really of interest to me. And I think it's possibly because my dad was not, he kept his stories close to his chest. So it was actually not that long ago in the grand scheme of things, probably only 20 years ago, that my parents came to visit me in America. We were sitting in the kitchen. A group of friends had come round and we were all chatting, and I happened to mention that my dad had been and still was a very, very, very fast runner, and that his opportunities had been curtailed by the war. His teachers had thought that he even had it in him to go to the Olympics. One of my friends looked at him and said, "Oh, Mr. Winspear, if you were that fast a runner, were you a message runner during the war?" And my dad said, "Well, funny you should say that, but yes, I was." And of course, my eyes nearly fell out of my head because I absolutely didn't know this part of my father's story. And he told his story, which was basically this, that even before the war started, just in a couple of weeks before the war, Britain declared war on Germany in September 1939, the ARP men, and by ARP, that is Air Raid Precautions, these were the men that would go around, and also women did this job as well. They would go around checking the blackout and things like that. They came round to the schools in London and other cities, and they wanted to watch the fastest runners, and they tapped them to run messages. So after school, my dad would report to run messages, mainly between ARP stations and what they called ACAC batteries, which were anti-aircraft batteries. And I was staggered by this story because I could just imagine this boy of 12 running through bombings, running so fast so that, you know, he earned some money doing it, and also running so that, you know, if you're a moving target, doesn't get hit. And I tucked that away, and I never knew at that point that I was ever going to be writing a book called Maisie Dobbs, and I would be thinking about a series, but I tucked it away, and it's one of the things that I pulled out. I don't think he ever saw a murder. He certainly never mentioned it to me, although it's entirely likely that my father saw deceased persons, because the bombings were terrible in London. And I've written about that before. You read the American Agent, I think, and there's more in this particular book. So that's the essence of the story. And of course, I've woven in other elements of story, you know, the relationship between Maisie and her evacuee. Just in case you haven't come so far, I won't tell you any more about that. But once again, you know, it was my dad's story that just gave me that hook, if you will, to grow the consequences of fear from there. And by the way, you know, people have often said to me, you know, that my titles, you know, how did you think up that title? Because it really reflects what's going on now. And especially with a title like The Consequences of Fear, I think so many of us have felt fear in the last year, you know, fear, trepidation, and it's the unknowing. But I assure you that my titles are usually come to a conclusion about them long before events happen, internationally or nationally. Before I close, I'd like to just show you a few photographs, and then we'll answer some questions. Okay, this first photograph shows you 3 little children outside their bombed house. This is during the Blitz. People often refer to all the bombing in London throughout the years of war as the Blitz. The actual Blitz was a very specific period, lasting basically from September 1940 right through to the following May. There was obviously a tremendous bombing thereafter, right through to the end of the war. But the Blitzkrieg was a very specific formation of aircraft. It was the big V shape of hundreds of enemy aircraft coming across and just blitz. It was Hitler's Blitzkrieg, and it was first tried out actually during the Spanish Civil War in Guernica, and later led to what happened in Poland and the Netherlands and across Europe. And he really thought that he would take over Britain with his Blitzkrieg, but people fought back, and fought back with their sheer, I think, strength of character, to tell you the truth. But this was not an unusual scene for my mother when she was a child. And then the next photograph. Okay, this is little children on the as they were being evacuated. Notice they've all got a little tag on, which gives their name and the name of their school. Usually, as they were being evacuated, they had absolutely no idea where they were going. My mother was evacuated, I think the day after the war or the day before the war was declared, and she just remembers the hundreds of children making their way towards the station, walking up in what we used to call crocodiles, holding hands with their neighbor, and the mothers walking alongside. And she had her belongings in just a paper bag, and she had notice those boxes, those are gas masks, and they had their little tags on, and it took them 3 days to get to their destination. In my mother's experience, she was evacuated with her siblings, 3 sisters and 2 brothers. Her mother told her to keep the family together, but she was unable to do that. The boys went to separate homes. And but initially when they reached their destination, the locals didn't quite know what to do with them. So initially they were all gathered in the pens used for the cattle market. And people would come along and say, well, I'll take that one, and that one, or I'll take that one. And in fact, I think someone wrote a book about evacuation, and it was called I'll Take That One. Some children had very good experiences, but some children had absolutely horrible experiences. One of my aunts said to me she felt like an orphan for 6 years because she was being shunted between different homes and they weren't her own. So those were children being evacuated in World War II. And the next one. This was my mother's street, actually. Her house was bombed. I think her one is the one in the foreground. And I believe one of those boys that you can see right ahead of you, just in front of the man with the beret, I believe that's my uncle. And this was actually as a result of a V2 rocket, part of a big bombing campaign after the Dam Busters raid, which I think many of you probably know about. The Dam Busters raid on the Ruhr dams in Germany, which was intended to knock out Germany's capability to make arms and so on and so forth. And this was the retribution, and London and other cities throughout the United Kingdom were bombed terribly with V2 rockets. My grandmother was a very slender lady, actually, and I actually wonder whether that lady in the front was her. She's quite thin, and I've wondered that as well. But anyway, this was the day after the bombing, and I think there's one more photograph to go. Oh no, 2. This one is if we can go back to that bombing scene. this is after the bombing. And, you know, I was born in the mid-50s. I was born in the county of Kent, way in the country, very rural area. But most of our extended family lived in London. So we would go up on the train 2 or 3 times a year. And even in the mid-60s, I can remember playing with my cousins on bomb sites like this. I mean, it was such a different world to mine. But we used to play on bomb sites because you never knew what you might find, some sort of treasure or something. The bombing was so extensive through London's cities that, in fact, Britain's cities, that in London, the final bomb sites were not removed until, in the East End, until they built the 2012 Olympic stadiums. So, so that, and you might notice that doorway is part of inspiration for the cover image on the front of The Consequences of Fear. And there's one more to go. I just thought you might like to see this one. This is what wearing masks looked like for kids in World War II Britain. This was during either a real threat of a gas attack. It didn't actually happen. Or it was a gas drill, or just getting them used to wearing their masks while they were working in school. But every child had a gas mask, and they took it to and from school and anywhere they went in that little box. There were also, for example, if you had a baby carriage, there was a special cover for a baby carriage that was meant to stop the gas getting in. And so you could be pushing your baby along and you wouldn't actually be able to see the baby because, or not very well, because had to be protected from potential gas attack. And of course, it seemed like a very real threat because of the way that gas was used in the previous war. And, you know, for example, my grandfather, till the day he died, still had horrible problems with his lungs because he was gassed during the Battle de Somme in 1916. But it's photographs like that, you know, I don't often moan about wearing my mask, but I look at that and think I have nothing to complain about, you know. So thank you very much for following that with me, and I'll be delighted to answer any questions that people may have.
Well, Jackie, thank you. That was powerful. That last
Thank you.
image, really, so interesting. Chris, can you show the jacket again? Just, we have that one photograph of that doorway in our minds. We'll get there, but thank you, Jackie. That was,
Oh, there we go.
oh boy.
Yeah, so you see that doorway, that was sort of the whole image of cowering in a doorway.
Yeah.
And that depicts, actually, you know, I've just sent out one of my newsletters, and one of my questions was, has anybody noticed the boy in the doorway looking on as this terrible thing is happening?
Mm.
And, you know, it's very much what they called a bomber's moon. When you had a full moon, it was like an invitation for, you know, the enemy to come in, because they had such a gorgeous view. Because, you know, the Thames snakes its way through London, and they could just follow the Thames and the reflection of the water. And in fact, one of the worst bombings, and there were several that were referred to was the worst, but one of the worst ones, it was in December 1940. I want to say it was just after Christmas. I can't remember the exact date. And not only was it a mass bombing, but hundreds of thousands of incendiaries were dropped, which caused a terrific fire. And fire has, as we know only too well in California, has its own energy, and it created a massive windstorm, which created more light, more destruction than London had ever seen before. And so, you know, the enemy was able to come in and see exactly where they were going and what they wanted to do. So
Something so beautiful that could have such a devastating effect.
Yeah. And actually, one of my aunts told me was that everyone in the household was given this kind of about a foot square asbestos pad so that if an incendiary dropped somewhere, even just one, you could put it out with your pad, or if it dropped on the roof, you know, someone could get up there and, you know, put it out. What she told me was, she said it was great for making toast, because you just put it on top of the gas burner and slap bread on top and you could make toast. And I thought, no wonder these people all got sick.
Wow.
You know? And
Wow.
in fact, yeah, I remember when my mother was in the hospital, she had a type of lung cancer, and the doctor said to her, "Now, Mrs. Winspear, have you ever been exposed to asbestos?" And she just rolled up laughing. She said, "I was in London in the war. I was a kid. We were all breathing in asbestos."
Sure.
You
Yeah.
know, that
Oh.
lucky she could see the funny side of it. But, you know,
Yeah.
anyway,
No. There's so much love here from librarians. We want to get to some of those questions before we check off, but I do want to mention your memoir, which was just published.
thank you.
This time next year, We'll Be Laughing. And while HarperCollins didn't publish that book, we congratulate you on it. And it was a Library Reads pick for November. So congratulations. So folks, you know, Harper's got the Maisie Dobbs,
Thank you.
to learn more about the Jacqueline Winspear's life, this time next year, We'll Be Laughing is just out there. So
Thank you very much, Virginia. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Absolutely. Your first novel, Maisie Dobbs, was a national bestseller, and it won all kinds of awards. New York Times Notable and Publishers Weekly Book Sense. It was nominated for 7 awards, including the Edgar. I mean, and this is, you know, you just, as you say, you find these pieces of history and then you build your story around them. And with Maisie at the center, this is your 16th Consequences of Fear. And this story about this boy, really, you do see what the consequences of fear are, and he is so frightened by what he's seen here. And but it's it's terribly interesting that you when people say that, I think, but it is terribly interesting that your father really didn't reveal much to you until, you know, this story about him running, being such a great runner, and then somebody says, "Were you ever a runner?" Well, yeah, I was. I mean, it's fascinating. Really, it's a fascinating story on a lot of levels. So I thank you so much for writing it. Can we get to a couple of questions, Chris Laney? There's, as I say, there's so much love, and you can go back there and so many great comments. But if there are any questions,
yeah. Maureen Roberts. So 16th book in the series. How do you keep track of all the plot points and details? You have to go back and refresh, or how do you keep up with it all?
I don't know that I do that very well, actually, but thank you for asking the question. I'm not one of these people that keeps sort of little cards and things like that. I actually keep an awful lot in my head, and I think that's not, well, it's worked for me after this many books, but I think what it means is I keep the key things in my head. You know, otherwise I'm not distracted by some of the minutiae, if you will, so I don't repeat that again. But one of the things I do for each book, I get an ordinary, you know, what do you call it? Those composition books that you get in the drugstore, and I do a lot of writing in that as I'm writing. But I will say, I tend to chuck those out afterwards. I'm actually very hot on destroying stuff. So no, I don't have a great method of I just have the books, actually, and occasionally I will leaf back through a book, or I'll go back to some notes I'd made. But I'm and because Virginia gasped, I have to tell you why I do what I do, which is shred everything and destroy things. In that, someone once asked me if they could, it was an antiquarian bookseller, as if he could place my notes in a university at some point, and it filled me with such horror that I thought, I have to get rid of them because I don't want that to happen. The thought that people could pick over my terrible notes when I'm gone was just awful. So I just and all my doodling and things like that, because I'm a great doodler, I thought, I've got to get rid of this because I don't want anyone finding this when I've gone. But thank you for the question. And I've often thought that maybe I should be better about keeping my notes, but really I think my notes are all in the books. The best, you know, they're the stories, and I have to go back to those. Yeah.
So yeah, we have an interesting question, especially considering the next author we're going to have on. Candace Nagel asks, I have been rereading all the Maisie Dobbs books, hoping to finish them prior to reading the new one, and this caused her to think about Maisie in terms of her full lifespan and the potential of her as an elderly detective eventually. Do you have any plans to continue her story throughout her lifespan? Also, she thanks you for all the history she's learned throughout the books.
Well, thank you very much for the comment and the question. But, you know, I think I'd probably be dead myself before I got to the end of Maisie's life. So who knows? I mean, who knows? We'll see. We'll see. I mean, I know where I'm going with this, and I wasn't aiming. I mean, good Lord, the woman deserves a break at some point, you know, to be able to sit out in her garden or wherever, you know, and enjoy life rather than, you know, keep working. So we'll see. I don't see her as a little old lady on a bicycle going around solving mysteries. Put it like that. I don't see that. You know, I see something else in her future. Yeah.
You don't see her as Angela Lansbury with a TV.
No, I don't. No, I don't. You know, no, I don't think she's not that sort of character.
Yeah.
She's not a Miss Marple or something like that. She's, you know, and I very much, you know, one of the things I wanted to do was to reflect in her and the other characters what happens on a more, let's say, a bigger scale can affect just ordinary people in the street. I think we've seen a grand example of that in the last year. But how, you know, they say that a butterfly wing in one part of the world can cause a hurricane in the other part of the world. But we are all impacted by the big events of our day. But one of the things I wanted to reflect in the books and in the stories is how that comes down to our ordinary daily lives, what that looks like for ordinary people. In which book was it? The American Agent. There's a scene which I took literally from something my aunt told me about, and it's such a small part of a scene that I think people might have missed it. But there's a scene where a woman is literally raking with her bare hands through the rubble because she knows her daughters are under there. And my aunt, who was 15 at the time, was walking back from work. She had to be she was sent home from work because her factory was bombed, and she was terrified because she didn't know what had happened to her own family. And she was walking along, running over the rubble, and she said one of the things that is seared into her memory is seeing this woman literally with her bare hands, and people are trying to tear her back from it, trying to get into the rubble to her children, her two daughters. And she told me about that, and that became seared into my memory. Then what she saw and what my aunt saw coming towards her was her father with my mother come to find her. And she said she can always remember my mum's arms around her and just holding her, you know. But so big event, big bombing, but how does that affect someone ordinary, you know, someone's ordinary every day? And the things like in wartime, rationing, and so on and so forth. And, you know, the fact that just in passing, you know, McFarlane says, wouldn't it be nice to have a bit of sugar in your tea, you know, and things like that. But that happens to all of us. We're all impacted in small ways by the big things that happen. Yeah.
Well, we're all impacted by your books and by Maisie Dobbs, who is this strong and brilliant and relatable character. And we love that you've given her to us. There are so many more.
You.
Yeah. We could go on, and I wish that we could, but we're running out of time. There are some more questions, so maybe Jackie, we could send the questions to you and and maybe you could answer them. They're questions like,
Absolutely.
what are you reading now? And yeah,
absolutely. And of course I must defer to the Queen, mustn't I? You know.
Well, we don't want to make her mad.
Must defer to the Queen, who comes next.
Queen comes next.
So I would be delighted to answer questions, and though you can always pass those on to me, and
okay.
No worries there. And I just feel so gosh, so privileged to be able to speak to so many librarians, and it's I love librarians.
We know it's
We have big hearts, shouldn't we? I love librarians, you know.
yeah, we do too.
Yeah.
And your love and your loyalty and admiration to them shows for all that you've done for libraries and librarians, and constantly supporting them by coming to conferences and doing things like this. Whenever we've asked you, you've said yes, not I'll get back to you, but yes and when. So we thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, and folks, we will make sure that all the questions that are in here get answered. We'll figure out, we know who everybody is, so we'll make sure
We
that
know who you are.
we know where you are.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll say goodbye for now, but we will see you again very soon. You stay well.
You
And
too.
The Consequences of Fear, the 16th in the Maisie Dobbs series, goes on sale in March. There's the jacket, arresting, beautiful. Look for the boy in the doorway who sees something he'll never forget, and there are consequences to what's happening there. Jacqueline Winspear, thank you so much for taking
Thank
the
you.
time to talk with all of us. You be
Yeah.
well.
You be well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Really
you,
appreciate
Jacqueline.
it. Take care.
Take
Bye-bye.
good care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so we're going to bring on Sophia now, author of The Winds Or Not. And folks, we know there are lots of questions, and there may be lots of questions. We can go over 3 o'clock, but we want to make sure that Sophia gets her time as well. And so we will make sure that all of your questions are answered from Ms. Jacqueline Winspear, who
Question.
delight. Yes, where are we?
All right.
Hello,
Hello.
how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. I so enjoyed that. I was watching that on Facebook, and
Oh, good.
yes, I loved it. I loved it when Jackie mentioned the Special Operations Executive, the SOE. It's always fascinated me. And one of my heroes is Violette Szabo, who is one of the heroes of it. And her cipher was written for her by Leo Marx, and it's a love poem. And my husband and I had it as one of the readings at our wedding. So yeah, I brought all of that back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
that's
interesting
so nice.
times.
Yeah, yeah, she's absolutely wonderful and delightful, as are you and your book, The Windsor Knot.
Thank
Hello. Oh my goodness, so many people have already read this. You can read it in the chats, and so many people have just read it and adored it. And so we were really excited to, we also had this crazy time frame, so we're Eastern. Lainey, where are you? You're Central? Central. You're on the West Coast, Sophia. No. Yes. Jackie's on the West Coast.
Yes, and I'm in London. So it's 7 p.m. here, which is why you've got the evening lighting. Yes.
I can't keep anything straight. But anyway, so let's get into this. So first of all, thank you again for coming and
Thank you for
talking
having
to
me.
librarians about this. As I said, so many people have read it. It's such a delightful read. And you have how many children's books have you published? Young adult?
10. So they're nine novels, and then I did the last one with Tate Gallery, and it's about women artists. So that was a non-fiction book, illustrated non-fiction for teens, and there isn't much of that about. So I was very, very pleased to do that. That was last year.
That's wonderful. That's terrific, and that's good for everybody here to know. But this is your first adult novel.
Yes.
And so do you want to, I never like to give away too much. So I think it's best if you tell everyone watching what you want them to know about The Winds Or Not, so they'll go and read it.
Okay, well, I'll probably come back to how I had the idea for this in the first place. But so this particular book, which I only finished writing about this time last year, I mean, it just seems insane that so much has happened since then. There is a thing called a dine and sleep at Windsor Castle. And many people have asked in reviews, is this a real thing? So I can take pleasure in saying it is a real thing. I was visiting Windsor Castle with my son one day years ago, and they talked about the Queen has dine and sleeps, And so she invites about 20 people to dinner. But the thing is, there's a bit of an entertainment after dinner, and then you sleep in Windsor Castle and you have breakfast there the next day. And I just thought, I want to do that so badly. Can you imagine what fun that would be? And so I Googled it when I got home, and the one that I Googled happened to have Tim Peake, who is our famous astronaut, and Delia Smith, who is our most famous chef, sitting side by side, and, you know, alongside the Archbishop of Canterbury. And it just sounded mad. So there's a dine and sleep at Windsor Castle, and one of the entertainers is found dead the next morning, and it seems like he died in his sleep, and then it seems like it was an accident, and then they begin to hear that there was more to it than that, and it's very suspicious circumstances. And he is found naked with just a dressing gown cord around his neck. And the Queen does what the Queen should do, which is leave it to the security services and the police to solve the crime. But they quickly decide that her servants are under suspicion. And then we switch to the Queen's sidekick, Rosie Ashodi, and she begins to discover that the Queen keeps asking her to do weird and wonderful things. And she discovers that the Queen has been solving crimes for a very, very long time, and the Queen is solving this crime. And then we follow Rosie as she does what the Queen asks her to do, always in secret, to try and work out who really killed the young Russian.
Love it. So many people love the idea of the Queen just sort of going, all right, I'll figure this out. And she's been doing this for a long time, right?
Yeah, well, my idea was she started doing it as a sort of 12, 13-year-old. Very much in Maisie Dobbs kind of territory, actually, that kind of time. And I do want to write those books, by the way. so I'll be following Jackie as a historian, I hope. But this one is set in 2016. So the Queen is 89, about to turn 90. And when I had the idea of writing about the Queen as a detective, I wanted to write about her kind of as she is now, as she has been recently. And she always seems popular, but actually her popularity goes up and down, and the royal family's popularity in the UK goes up and down a lot, and weird things happen and we get very upset about stuff. But 2016 was a really good year for her. She was turning 90. Everything seemed to be rosy. Harry had met Meghan, but we didn't really know about that. Yeah, we were just discovering that new relationship. When we discovered it, we were very excited. So it was that kind of period in history. So yeah, I decided that I was going to set it then and work backwards. So I will do 4 books set around 4 years ago. And then I'll do some set in the 1960s, and some set in the 50s, and some set in the 30s. And I hope that one day I'll be on here talking about my 16th novel in the series. That would be wonderful.
Well, excuse me, if the first is any indication, you will be. It's really very captivating. And I'll give Lainey and Chris time to dive in here and to ask questions from folks and their own as well. But I just wanted to know about if you could talk a little bit about your father and his influence, and because you draw from his experience a bit. Huh?
I certainly do. It's really what gave me the idea in the first place. I was thinking about The Crown, inevitably, and season 2, which was a while ago. And the Queen just did something very, very small in it that I was reflecting on, that she wouldn't do that. And it was just about moving a soldier on a model battlefield. And my father has met her. Well, we worked it out, it's probably about a dozen times now, because he was in the army for 30 years, and then he was in our National Health Service, and he met her in both of those roles. And he's a big fan. And the person that he described to me is so fun and engaging and has this fantastic memory. And I thought she would make a really wonderful detective. But yeah, I've got some pictures to show you, which I'm very happy to talk along if Chris would like to share them. Just to kind of explain. So these two are me and that little boy is my brother, who now has a boy of that age of his own. I was standing here with my dad and also with my mum in Trafalgar Square, and it was 1977, and I was 11, or about to turn 11. And it was the Queen's Silver Jubilee, and this was the first time I was really aware of her as a person. And we'd come back from Hong Kong, where we had the mobile library and the ice cream van. And there we were about to go and see her waving on from the balcony of Buckingham Palace. And it was, although the weather wasn't great that day, it was a really exciting day, and we got into the thrill of it. My brother and I now run a podcast called Pre-Published for Unpublished Writers, so we're still very fond of each other. We still work together. If we go to the next slide, I can show you this is the same year. The Queen did a tour of the UK, and here she is in probably Chester, I think, and that's my father holding up a sword, standing beside her. Now he already has a couple of medals, so he will have met her while he was getting those from her, I imagine. This was the first of several occasions, I think, when he was on honour guards with her and that kind of thing. He wouldn't have got to talk to her particularly that day. But if we go to the next slide, these are all taken from the downstairs bathroom in my parents' house that's full of photographs of the Queen, and one guy's or another. So this is my mother meeting the Queen many years later in the 1990s. And you can see the sort of friendly smile that the Queen has, shaking my mother's hand, and the gloves that she is wearing, because she was into hygiene a long time before the rest of us with the pandemic. But the Queen doesn't want to get a cold, because then she can't do her duties properly. So she wears gloves so she doesn't catch germs from us all while she's shaking hands with us. And if we go to the next slide, I love this one. So it was an event to celebrate the Gurkhas, and the Queen is very fond of the Gurkhas in the army, and my father's been associated with them since I was a very little girl. So my father is sitting next to the Queen, and my mother is sitting next to Prince Philip in that picture. And that's George IV behind them in the big portrait, who added lots of bits and pieces to Windsor Castle, which I talk about in the book. And then the very elegant lady on the left of the picture, the far left, is our friend Michelle, who's been a family friend for a long time, and we always think that she looks extremely glamorous. So these are the sort of occasions where my parents would meet the Queen without cameras, apart from, you know, these particular pictures, and just see what she's like. And as I say, she's fun and has this great sort of interest in what's going on, and great memory for whether she's met you before and where that was and all that kind of thing. And if we go to the next slide, I love this. I actually came across this big picture when I was doing some research for the second book. And I was looking up Princess Anne, and there was a picture of her husband, Tim Lawrence, who's on the right-hand side of that big picture. And I was looking at him in the picture thinking, that's nice. And then glancing across thinking, I'm sure I know the man who's smiling. I'm sure it's my own father. And I had to double check with him and go, is that you? And he said, oh, yeah, no, I remember that day. I think she went to plant a tree at the Gurkha Museum or something like that. And he has other pictures from that day as well. And then in the smaller picture, he and the Queen were showing the Sultan of Brunei around the Tower of London. And he was telling me recently that was a bit tricky. There was one moment where it was just him and the Queen walking between two buildings, and they had to go down a narrow spiral staircase. And etiquette meant that, of course, he should let her go first, but sheer health and safety meant that he should go first in case she tripped. You know, he could catch her fall. And he said, "What would you like me to do, ma'am?" And she said, "Oh, you go first. I'll go after you." So yes, he went to brace her fall just in case, but she is very nimble and agile, and it was all fine. But as you'll see, she's smiling, and I like to think that he can make her smile. And if we go to the next pictures, these are not mine. This is my favorite picture of the Queen, the one on the left. It's very well known, and she's in her 80s when this one was taken at, I believe, Windsor Castle, I think it is. And Prince Philip is saying something to her. There he is in his uniform and his bearskin, and she's doubled over with laughter practically, and they make each other laugh still, and they've been married for 73 years now, and I think that's a rather wonderful thing. And there they are early in their marriage, all laughing. So that really hasn't changed, and that's something I really wanted to capture in the books. And I don't know if people have been watching the latest series of The Crown. In fact, I haven't been watching it. I'm sure I will. But actually every still I see shows her looking really grumpy and annoyed, or as if she's having a joke at somebody else's expense. And that's just, I mean, she does look like that occasionally, but the Queen I know and enjoy is this one, not the grumpy and annoyed one. So that's the one I wanted to capture. And I just got a couple more. This one is a rather interesting picture. So after the last time my father arranged a visit for her, the following year, utterly coincidentally, I was asked if I would like to apply to work for her as her assistant private secretary. So in real life, she has a private secretary and a deputy private secretary and 2 assistant private secretaries. And that was too many for the book, so I cut out the deputy and one of the other assistants. But I did interview for this job, and that is the door on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace that I walked through for my interview. And it was really surreal. It was just like, you know, it's like an ordinary day. You go to your job interview, but it is in that part of Buckingham Palace. And everybody was charming. And if I'd passed, which I didn't, the Queen would have been the next person to interview me. But it was the job that got away. I became a writer instead, which I always that was what I really wanted to be. But I've made Rosie, the sidekick in the WINDSOR KNOT, have the job that I interviewed for and didn't get, and always thought about how fascinating that would be. And then the last pictures here bring us up to date. I took these last summer when I was writing the book and planning the series and revisiting the castle just to check that I'd got things where I wanted them to be. And so if you're interested, I've taken the picture of the soldiers, the guardsmen, the door on the left, in the middle of the picture, really, that's the door to the Round Tower, which is what you can see in the other picture. And that is where I've put my fictional detectives who are beavering away, trying to solve the crime. And then the door on the right is not talked about very much. It's a gate that visitors do pass under, and that goes to the Norman Tower. And that's where the governor lives. And the governor is one of the characters in my book. He's a fictional governor, but he is based on various people that I know, and that's where he would live, and with windows that overlook the moat, which doesn't have any water in it now. And I was very lucky that through the sort of contacts that we have, I've been able to talk to lots of people who have worked for the Queen and just ask them little questions like, what does she call you? Does she call you by your first name or your last name or your job title? And what is this room called? And if you happen to bump into her behind the scenes, what do you do? And do you have to say anything? Are you allowed to look at her? You know, and all of that kind of thing. And frankly, you are, and she's quite friendly. And you do sort of, you nod your head, you don't sort of fully bow, and you bob curtsy, and then you get on with what you're doing, and she gets on with what she's doing. So it's really useful to know these little details. So I think that's all of those pictures, but we have many more that I'm sure I'll be sharing over the years.
I love that. I love these pictures that you're sharing, because naturally they're not in the book, but they're just another level of understanding and that intimacy that your father had with her, and consequently that you do. I mean, you know, being able to write about Rosie O'Shodey, I think she's a really interesting character, and actually, could you talk about Rosie for a sec?
Oh, with great pleasure. I am so glad that readers have taken to Rosie as much as I love her. So Rosie has the job that I wanted, and there's a lot of autobiography. But Rosie is nearly 6 foot tall, and I am 5'4". And Rosie loves wearing pencil skirts and high heels, and I would, but I'm not sure I'd get away with it. And she's also of Nigerian heritage, and she has a really cool natural hairstyle. And she's ex-army, which I'm not either, but she's really good at looking after herself. And she's just been working for the Queen for 6 months, whereas everybody else has been working for her for years. So no, Rosie doesn't quite know exactly how things are done yet. She's really good at her job. So she's not quite sure what's going on when the Queen asks her to do things. And she realizes she's not allowed to actually ask. She kind of has to work it out for herself. So I love Rosie just learning her trade as she goes along. And one thing that I will sort of say here is Rosie discovers that there is a kind of club of assistant private secretaries who've worked for the Queen over the decades. There aren't that many of them, but they are the only people who know that the Queen is a secret detective, and they are the only women that she trusts to help her do what she does. Because the Queen's problem in my fictional world, but I also believe possibly in the real world, is the Queen is surrounded by men who had a university education and belong to lots of gentlemen's clubs and are very intelligent and well educated and good at what they do, and who adore the Queen and really want to serve her, but don't listen to her because they think of her a little bit as a little old lady, and don't fully understand that as a result of sort of 70 years of statecraft, she's quite good at what she does. So the Queen has learned over the years to trust the women who work with her. And yeah, I'll be delving into that a little bit more with each of the books, I think, and the relationship that they have. But there's a particular scene with Rosie that if you've read the book, you'll know the one I mean, which I blocked out with my father, and was one of the most fun scenes to write, where Rosie really comes into her own, and you think, yeah, this is we're glad the Queen's got Rosie on her side.
We have a lot of love for librarians. I'm going to turn this over to Chris and Lainey to ask some questions. I did want to just quickly, Barbara Jenko, our dear friend Barbara Jenko, says she is so excited to start this book. Vicki Nesting loved reading The Windsor Knot. Such a great premise. People are loving the slideshow. So
oh, thank you.
Yeah. So Chris, Lainey, I'll let you take it.
Sure, yeah, and you did answer one question that a lot of people have been asking, is they do want this to be a series, so they're absolutely thrilled to hear that. And it's really interesting because you talked about setting books in different points of the Queen's life. What made you start at age 90 for her? And I really found you writing her viewpoint fascinating, really well done. What was it like writing an older character and getting that voice and getting that viewpoint right? Because it rings really true and not pandering in any way. It's just really great. So I'm curious about that.
Well, it was partly laziness. I thought I will set the first one in a time where I don't have to do that much historical research. So it started that way, and it was vague recentness. And then I thought, well, okay, let me pick a year. And I picked 2016, and then I realized, oh, she turns 90. That's interesting. And then I discovered that the Times does every day, the Times newspaper, the London Times, publishes what the Queen is doing that day and who she's meeting. And that is now online, which I didn't know. And so I could find out exactly what the Queen was doing every day. So it became very precisely then. And in terms of her being an older woman, I had two fantastic grannies. One of them was a nanny for a very aristocratic kind of Scottish family. They used to, they had their own train that they kept, that they would bring them down to London for the season every year. So she was amazing. And then my other granny grew up in Manchester, and sounds very much like the kind of woman that Jackie would write about. And I thought of them, I mean, they were both born kind of around 1918, 1916, so just a few years before the Queen, who was born in 1926. And so I pictured them, and they were feisty women, they were intelligent, they weren't as educated as they would be now, but they didn't let that hold them back. You couldn't get anything past them. They would beat me in card games. They were very funny. And so it was very easy to bring a lot of that, I think, to the woman that I was writing. I've tried to make it as authentic as I can, The real Queen is mysterious, which I love, but we also know a lot about her. So where possible, I've tried to keep it authentic.
Yeah, I loved it. And I loved her kind of internal dialogue about how she's aware people are responding to her. Yeah, I thought it was so well done. So thank you for explaining that.
I do think, yes, the Queen in the book is very annoyed that everybody is so nervous in her presence, and I think that's true. I think she wishes people could just relax. And in fact, somebody was telling me recently, in the days when one could, the royal family would encourage people to smoke in their presence because they knew it would put them at their ease if they were in a kind of informal setting. Because anything to relax people, they would try and get them to do.
And I actually listened to the audio e-galley. We have that available on Edelweiss and NetGalley for any librarian.
So well done.
So great. And I think taking your words and putting the voices to each person, I could see, the actors in The Crown who try to get her voice. I can hear it, and they did it so well. So I mean, obviously you have your experience with her, but was there ever a moment when you had to have her react to something and you didn't know exactly maybe how? Like, what's your point of reference? What do you go back to? Do you look for video footage to kind of see how she responds to stuff, or just read about it?
It's a bit magical actually when I'm writing. There's moments when I do go inside her head. I tend to go inside her head because I feel at that moment I know what works for the story, or I just feel I know what she would be thinking maybe. But I do a massive amount of research all the time. I'm reading biography, I'm watching news clips, old ones and new ones, and I'm just immersed in it. So yeah, it's a combination of things, and I also read biographies of women of around her age as well, other women, just to see what they would be thinking too. But it's lovely when I'm actually in the moment of writing. It just kind of comes, which is a very exciting thing, and I hope that keeps happening.
I'm sure it will. That makes sense. If you have her, so close to you, it comes.
Well, it took a year, I have to say, actually. There was a year of trying to do this and it not working. And I worked really closely with my husband, and I gave him something I was really proud of, and early chapters, and he didn't say anything. And I said, were they okay? And he said, actually, no, they were not up to your usual standard. And he'd never said that before. And I thought, okay, so I didn't do it for another 3 months or so while I thought about it some more. It took a long time to come. But when it came with a particular scene of the Queen and Prince Philip talking to each other. And once it came, then it stayed. So I think I've got the voice now. Yeah.
It's an impressive level of honesty and line of communication you two have.
Yeah, well, yeah, we
intense dinner table talk, but respect to you both. And this is an interesting question. So Maureen Roberts, our friend, asked, do you have like any mystery authors who were influential to you, whether writing this or writing when you were growing up?
Oh, that's a lovely question. I really like that. Thank you very much. My favorite is Dorothy L. Sayers. And I love Nine Taylor's Murder Must Advertise, Gaudy Night. There are a lot. Although interestingly, I'm just listening to Have His Carcass at the moment, which is a famous Dorothy Sayers story, and it's got a dead Russian in it. And I'm thinking people will think, oh, she took that from that book, and I had completely forgotten that plot line. So I've stolen many things from Sayers, but not that. So she was my favorite, but Rex Stout was another favorite. And there is bizarrely a lot of Nero Wolfe in the Queen in the way I write her. She can't go out much. She has to send a sidekick. And Archie Goodwin is just one of my favorite characters of all time. So my confidence to have the Queen kind of stuck at home and Rosie to go and do the legwork, that's pure Rex Stout. And Agatha Christie, obviously, and Donna Leon and P.D. James. And yeah, I just got a stack of them. When I was in Hong Kong, I discovered the Ellery Queen books and all the short stories. And so it was Ellery Queen, I think, that got me into reading crime when I was a little girl.
We have so many Dorothy Sayers books under our roof at HarperCollins. Yeah, so that's really, really wonderful.
See here. Okay, and one thing I do want to make sure we get to, Sophia, is
yes.
Reading. I know you have a passage that might provide a nice introduction to the book.
Oh, lovely. Okay. Yes, I know we're kind of going over the time a bit, aren't we? So I hope this is all right.
Not to worry at all.
Oh, good. I've got a few pages here. I like to do this. I can't do it as well as Jane Copeland, but I will do my best. So they've discovered the body, and they've discovered that it was in very suspicious circumstances, and the Queen is just coming to terms with this, and this is the first time that we see Prince Philip on the scene. Philip was full of the news when he arrived to share a coffee with her after lunch. Lilibet, did you hear the man was nude? Yes, actually, I did. Strung up like a Tory MP. There's a word for it. What is it? Auto-sex something. Autoerotic asphyxiation, the Queen said grimly. She had Googled it on her iPad. That's the bugger. Do you remember Buffy? One did indeed recall the 7th Earl of Wandle, an old friend who had been rather partial to the practice in the 50s by all accounts. Back then it had seemed practically de rigueur among a certain set. What the butler saw, eh? Philip said. Had to rescue the blighter on many an occasion, apparently. Buffy was hardly an oil painting, even with his clothes on. What was he thinking? She wondered. My dear, I try not to imagine Buffy's sex life. No, I mean the young Russian, Brodsky. Well, that's obvious, Philip said, gesturing around him. You know what people are like in this place. They come here, decide it's the pinnacle of their bloody existence and need to let off steam. The high jinks that go on when they think we're not looking. Poor bastard. He dropped his voice sympathetically. Didn't think it through. Last thing you want is to be discovered in a royal palace with your ghoulies out. Philip! No, I mean it. No wonder everyone's keeping it hush-hush. That and protecting your fragile nerves. The Queen threw him a look. They forget. I've lived through a world war, that Ferguson girl, and you in the Navy. And yet they think you'll need smelling salts if they so much as hint at anything fruity. All they see is a little old lady in a hat. He grinned as she frowned. That last remark was true and very useful and rather sad. Don't worry, Cabbage, they love that little old lady. He rose stiffly from his chair. Don't forget, I'm off to Scotland later. The salmon's spectacular this year, Dickie says. Need anything? Fudge? Nicholas Sturgeon's head on a platter? No, thank you. When will you be back? A week or so. I'll be in good time for your birthday. Dickie's going to stuff up the atmosphere and fly me in his jet. The Queen nodded. Philip tended to run his own diary these days. Years ago, she had found it rather heartbreaking when he disappeared off with who knew who to do God knew what, leaving her in charge. A part of her was jealous, too, of the freedom, the self-determination. But he always came back, bringing with him a burst of energy that cut through the corridors of power like a brisk sea breeze. She had learned to be grateful. Actually, she said, as he bent arthritically to drop a kiss on her forehead, I wouldn't mind some fudge. Your wish is my command. He grinned, making her heart melt with clockwork precision, and strode to the door. So that's Philip, and I miss him when he's not there.
Oh my God, you could read that entire book to us.
I do love it. It's fun.
It's fabulous. It's fabulous. Guys, do we have more questions, comments? One thing I do want to mention is that on Edelweiss, there on the online catalog, there are 2 pieces of must-read behind the book piece that Sophia has written, and they're all about, you know, her dad, which you talked about, and also just sort of that scene in The Crown where, you know, with what sparked the fire, what sparked the idea, you know, their queen in The Crown and your queen, who I think had a little more warmth.
It's truly amazing, Virginia, to think that I had that idea in 2018, and here I am talking to so many librarians today. It's been such a journey. I'm so grateful.
We all are, you know, we all are. I mean, when somebody, you know, when people start to, you connect with these stories and these wonderful ideas, and then you have this extra added, your own wonderful way of telling stories and communicating, and then also having this history, which is really, really unique and pretty wonderful. There are a couple of really wonderful quotes here too. Ruth Ware says, this is a pitch perfect murder mystery. If the Crown were crossed with Miss Marple, the result would probably be something like this charming whodunit. And then I like this quote from Peter Swanson, and librarians have really, they have really embraced Peter Swanson. He's got just wonderful, we're such big fans of his too. He's just great mystery writer. And he says, in this delightful and suspenseful whodunit, author S.J. Bennett pulls off the prodigious feat of transforming Queen Elizabeth into an amateur detective. For those of us who love The Crown, but think it should have a little more murder in it, this is perfection, and hopefully the first of many, which it is, happy to say. So thank you so much. Is there anything else, guys, before we need to bid adieu to Sophia? Bennett?
Just a lot of fans, new and standing fans, who appreciate you learning more about the book that they've read and have been just so excited about. And then, yeah, a lot of people have added it to their TBR list. They're just so excited to have a new series in their lives. And they're happy to know it is a series. So
that's great. Well, yes, I can reassure them that book 2 is done. And book 3 I'm writing now, and that's set at Sandringham, and book 4 will be set at Balmoral. And then there will be others on the Royal Yacht Britannia and the Royal Train. And yeah, so it's
such an interesting approach that you're starting from 2016 and then you're going back.
Yeah, as I say, laziness. I'm gonna learn how to be a historical novelist as I go along. Also, there is something about the statecraft, the wisdom, the fact that the Queen is not mad, having been in the public eye for her whole lifetime, astonishes me. And the fact that she is humane after everything she's been through amazes me. And I think we'll miss her a lot when she's gone. I think it's, you know, there's her, there's Nelson Mandela. I can't think of that many people who've been on that spotlight and survived. So I wanted to write about that. Yeah, that I think I wanted to capture some of that. I think it's a special thing.
That was special. Thank you for it. Thank you so much. Lainey, Edelweiss catalogs, the eGalley is up, the e-audio is up. The book goes on sale in March. Library Reads voters, you have till February 1st to download, read this, and love it like everybody else. Join on the the WINDSOR KNOT. You just have to tell explain the title for Jacqueline Winspear.
Okay, so a WINDSOR KNOT is a particular way of tying a tie. People love it or hate it. Apparently in the James Bond novels, James Bond hated it, but it creates a nice fat knot. And I knew very, very early on I was going to set the book at Windsor and that was going to be the title. And I literally created a murder to fit the title. I worked backwards from the title because I was so happy when I found it.
So great. That's fantastic. I love that. Guys, you have anything else? I know, Lady, you want to talk about some upcoming things if we've wrapped up with, yeah?
I think we're good. Sophia, if people do have questions, is it okay if we write to you and we'll get some written answers for follow-up?
Yeah, absolutely. When I finish my Christmas cards, I'm happy to do question answering.
First things first, but yeah, we appreciate it, as do the librarian viewers.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This Thursday, we typically do one door-to-door a week. We're doing another one this week on Thursday. So folks, if you can come back and join us for a really special hour with Nikki Giovanni and Nancy Johnson, author of The Kindest Lie. And Lainey, what did you want to add?
So one other thing happening this week is our Instagram takeover, which we do every Friday. We're very excited to welcome Kate Baer to the feed. So you can follow that at Harper Library and see all of her posts. Her book, What Kind of Woman, was an instant New York Times bestseller. So we're very excited. And if you go to our feed now, you can see some of the poetry from the book and get excited for that. So that's this Friday, the 18th. And then just quickly, we had an amazing podcast interview with Meg Mason and her editor last week, and this book has just been getting the craziest reviews in the best way, and I'll let her editor give you a little sneak peek.
Hi, it's Emily Griffin, executive editor at the Harper division of HarperCollins, and I'm going to be talking to Meg Mason on the Library Love Fest podcast. Meg Mason is the debut author of the novel Sorrow and Bliss, which has been praised by Ann Patchett as a brilliantly faceted and extremely funny book about depression that engulfed her in all the ways she's hoping to be engulfed by novels. If that's not an endorsement, I don't know what is, but Mary Beth Keane has called it brutal, tender, and funny. Amanda Eyre Ward has compared it to Joan Didion and Rachel Cusk, yet completely original and thrilling. I hope you got a chance to listen in.
So I just wanted to tell people, in case they missed it last week, that this is how you have to go listen to this interview. It's really, really wonderful. So SoundCloud and Library Love Fest, and you'll find it there.
And also, if you go to SoundCloud, you will hear David Highfill, the editor of the WINDSOR KNOT, talking about books that he loves, and Sophia's book, The WINDSOR KNOT, at the top of that list. So, and I'm serious when I say when David Highfill comes in and talks about a book that he's so passionate about, it fills the room. That energy fills the room. And that happened when he came in and talked about your book. And I'm not saying that. I am not. It was really just so palpable and wonderful. He's the editor of Greg Iles' books and Wiley Cash. just to give you some framework for what David Highfield does and what he publishes, which is really smart and compelling reads that really deliver on so many levels. And the WINDSOR KNOT does that. So, Sophia,
I'll share that too, that link
Yeah,
you guys can look.
that would be great. Thanks, Lainey. Sophia, thank you so much again for taking the time to talk with everyone today. And you take care and stay well. And everyone who's watching, we hope we see you on Thursday with Nikki Giovanni and Nancy Johnson. Take good care, all. Thanks for watching.
Thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.